Hello, and welcome to this Wandsworth Library's talk. Today we are travelling back to ancient Rome to learn the story of Lucius Septimius Severus, the African emperor. In the time which we're speaking of, the 2nd century AD, the power of the Roman Empire was at its height. Its territory stretched from the islands of Britain in the west to the sands of Mesopotamia in the east, from the banks of the Rhine in the north to the cataracts of the Nile in the south. Lucius Septimius Severus, the man who would be emperor, was born in 145 AD in the town of Leptis Magna. Leptis Magna was an important regional centre and had a long and storied history dating back even to the time of Carthage. The Carthaginian civilization, an empire which had once controlled northern Africa from the borders of Egypt even up into Spain, had struggled centuries ago with the Roman Empire for control of the Mediterranean. Theirs was a harsh and storied war, including the great tale of Hannibal crossing the Alps with African elephants to terrorize the people of the Italian peninsula. And although Carthage had lost the war, it had not lost its people. Septimius Severus, in fact, could trace his ancestry directly back to the aristocracy of ancient Carthage. And his first language was Punic, the language of the Carthaginian civilization. And even though he could speak Latin and Greek fluently, he never lost his African accent, even to the end of his days. And the people of Carthage, even though they were Roman citizens, held still the memory of that ancient civilization. The philosopher Apuleius of Madaros said, "Carthage is the divine muse of Africa. Carthage is the fountain of inspiration for the Roman world." The story of Lucius Septimius Severus really begins when he was 17 and he was summoned to Rome to enroll in the Senate at the express wish of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. As part of the Senate, the Roman Parliament, Severus was now eligible to take part in Roman government. In his initial stages, he was administrator of Roman roads and public facilities in the city of Rome itself, although his career was slightly interrupted by a plague which broke out in Rome in 166 and forced him to return to Africa. However, he was soon back on his political trail, holding the offices of quaestor, treasury official, of the tribune of the plebs, which was an office meant to protect the common people against the abuses of magistrates. He also held a position as a lieutenant to the governor of Africa and as a praetor, one of the senior judges of Rome, all culminating in the chief political position of consul. Consul was sort of like a Roman president, second only in honor and authority to the emperor himself. He also held the position of governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, which was a territory which spanned across much of northern Europe. He was the governor of Sicily, and finally the governor of Pannonia Superior, which is a territory which is about where Austria, Croatia, Hungary, Serbia, Slovakia is today. Septimius Severus had long had dreams and premonitions of his rise to power. When he was first summoned to the city of Rome at age 17, he dreamt that he had suckled from a wolf alongside Romulus and Remus, a powerful omen that he was in the lineage of the rulers of Rome. When he was summoned to dine for the first time at the imperial palace, he wore the wrong kind of costume. He wore a long Greek robe rather than the formal toga. In a rush to get him dressed in a proper way, he was in fact dressed in the imperial toga, and then by accident seated in the imperial throne. When he returned to Africa as the lieutenant to the governor there, a mathematician, foreseer of the future, an astrologer, actually discovered in his birth charts the great destiny that awaited him. And although he would keep this secret for fear of the vengeance of emperors, he always held it close to his heart. When it was time to be married, he sought out a wife who had been prophesied to be the wife of a king. The year 193 was to be an important year to Septimius Severus, although he didn't know it yet. It was going to be a year of war. It was going to be a year of turmoil. It was to be the year of 5 emperors. The first was the Emperor Pertinax, who sat upon the imperial throne in Rome with an idea of reforming much of the corruption that had crept into the empire. However, he was to be assassinated by none other than his own guard, the Praetorian Guard, supposedly the most elite and most loyal guards in the entire empire, plucked from the cream of Italian aristocracy, armed with the best equipment, given the best training and the best pay. These guards compounded their folly by auctioning off the title of emperor to the highest bidder. That bidder would be Didymus Julianus, a Roman noble and senator who bought the empire for a staggering sum of gold. However, in the provinces, there were 3 who stood against him. Pescennius Niger, a general in Syria at the command of 10 legions of troops. Clodius Albinus, a general in Britain at the command of 3 legions of troops. Clodius Albinus was, like Septimius Severus, an African, although from Hadrumetum in Tunisia, rather than from Lepus Magnum. When he had heard the indignity that had been thrust upon the imperial title, he took to the stage in front of his troops and proclaimed that he would restore the ancient republican government of Rome, which had not flourished for 150 years. And finally, Septimius Severus in Pannonia Superior, at the head of 16 legions. Severus, being outraged at the indignity of the assassination and the baseness of the auction, marched south through the Alps and was soon at the doorstep of Rome. Although Julianus attempted to assuage him, first by declaring him a public enemy and then by accepting that they could be co-emperors, he was sentenced to death by the Senate and executed. The Praetorian Guard readied to hold up in their fortress and fight off against Septimius Severus. However, he offered them clemency, saying that if they would surrender up the ringleaders, that he would spare the rest of them. When the ringleaders were given up to justice, were killed, Severus then invited the guards to attend him in their formal robes without their weapons. Although they may have suspected something, those who did not attend were swiftly arrested. Those who did were surrounded by Severus's troops. Severus berated the Praetorians for dereliction of duty, for their cowardice and their baseness, and then, true to his word, did not have them executed, but exiled them 100 miles from Rome. He stripped them of their medals and their fine gear and forced them to walk in their now tattered official robes those 100 miles from Rome. Septimius Severus then marched eastward to fight Pescennius Niger. Niger had been proclaimed emperor in Antioch by his troops, but the Senate supported Severus. After a quick campaign, Niger was dead, and the empire was belonging to Septimius Severus. There was still the matter of Clodius Albinus, who was promoted by Severus to the office of Caesar, or junior emperor, in 194. It seemed that this would mend the rift. However, Severus, having deified the deceased Pertinax, then took on the title for himself of son of Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who had first inducted him into the Senate, and renamed his son Julius Severus Bassianus to Marcus Aurelius, and named him his heir. At this, Clodius Albinus's troops revolted, proclaimed him emperor, and went from the British Isles into Gaul, defeating Severus's lieutenant there. However, Septimius Severus was a more cunning warrior than that, and easily defeated Clodius Albinus in the field in 197. Let's have a look at the face of Septimius Severus. Here we can see various representations on coins, and here marble busts. We often think of these white marble figures as how they would have appeared in Rome, but they actually would have been painted in vivid color to greater evoke the living flesh of those they were representing. Unfortunately, after the thousands of years, the paint is worn away. However, we do still have one painted representation of Septimius Severus from the period, and this is him. With the defeat of Albinus, Severus brought an end to 4 years of war and brought peace to the empire. He swiftly began to reform it, creating a more military role for the emperor as a leader of armies. He stationed several armies in Rome to strike out throughout the empire where they might be needed, and reformed the Praetorian Guard, no longer a privileged position for Italian aristocracy, but rather a reward for service, selecting only the greatest, most loyal, and most accomplished soldiers from the legions of the empire to serve in this prestigious position. He led a campaign against the Parthians, the empire to Rome's east and their chief rival, going so far as to burn their capital city to the ground. And in 208, he crossed across to Britain. The soldiers that Albinus had taken from Britain had caused many barbarian incursions and uprisings. The people of Britain were crying out for help from the emperor. The emperor came with his armies and restored the border at Hadrian's Wall, rebuilding it. Much of what you can see today would have been built by Septimius Severus, and even pushed on into Caledonia, fighting the Scottish people and rebuilding the Antonine Wall, although the permanent border would remain at Hadrian's Wall. In this period, his 2 sons were with him. That was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, formerly Julius Septimius Bassianus, and Publius Septimius Geta. Marcus Aemilius was better known by his nickname, Caracalla, which came from the Gallic coat he wore. In the period of the campaigns in Britain, Geta, the emperor's younger son, was made to be the administrator of Britain, and once more an African ruled over England. Whereas Caracalla, the more warlike son, accompanied his father on his military campaigns. Unfortunately, in 211, the emperor fell ill, and at 66 years of age, he died at Eboracum in York, and brought to the end the story of Septimius Severus, the African emperor, His sons would go on to succeed him, although a much darker fate would await their reign. Geta and Caracalla had never gotten on, and despite an attempt by their father to unify them, he made them joint heirs to the empire. This did not last a year, and Caracalla had his brother murdered. Caracalla would go on to have a reign full of military victories and bloody backstairs secrets. However, he also did much good for the empire, creating the great baths of Caracalla in Rome and extending the benefits of Roman citizenship to every inhabitant of the empire. However, that is a story for another time. In fact, there are many more stories of Africans within the Roman Empire. Amongst others, Quintus Lollius Urbicus from Cirta in Algeria, who was the governor of Britain and constructed the first Antonine Wall. Publius Salvius Julianus, who was consul in 148. Lucius Alphanus Senecio, a governor of Britain and a Numidian from Cuicourt in Algeria. This and many more things can be found out at your local library. Thank you for watching and enjoy. Awe atque sale.